Hey everyone, and welcome to a Tower Babel Game of Thrones breakdown. This is kind of another Season 7 preview. We had a little bit of a fun story that dropped a couple days ago. We thought we should pop in and kind of discuss it a little bit. And basically, according to the story that I read on IGN, HBO has closed deals for writers to begin working on 4 potential Game of Thrones spin-off potential prequel series. Now, before we get into that, I'll make sure to mention Dan's here.
Hello.
And also mention a huge thank you to everyone who has helped support us so far in our GoFundMe. So if you didn't know, we're doing a GoFundMe to fund this season of our Tower Babel Game of Thrones breakdowns. We're trying to reach $1,000 Canadian, which I mentioned actually in the last full Tower Babel podcast, that if you live in the States or elsewhere where the most places in the world, where your dollar is stronger than the Canadian dollar, you basically get a discount on every donation, right? For instance, the Canadian dollar is around 75 cents US right now. So a $100 donation costs you about $75. You know, quick mental math there again, $10 donation to get on the Slack group, $7.50 about that, give or take. You're getting a deal. All I'm saying is you're getting a deal, and you're making you're basically it's to be fair though, Dan, it's a steal at twice the price, but you know,
I like to think so.
Right. And so if you haven't gone over there, GoFundMe.com/GOT Season 7, so the number 7 at the end, and get in there. The Slack group has kind of started to pick up some steam, so that's kind of fun. If you donate $10, you get in the Slack group, and so that is awesome. So
a couple cool conversations
so far. So we'd like that to pick up, and obviously we're going to keep the campaign open throughout the season, leading into the final, into basically right up to the end. And hope if we can get to 1,000 to do that bonus episode. So just keep that in mind. And huge thanks to everyone who's donated so far. So we're about 30% funded. And
but we're going to do the shoutouts on episode 1 of the actual season.
That's right. So we're saving the beginning of the shoutouts till episode 1, and we'll try to maybe stretch them out over the season if we can. And
my sister's already mad at me.
Why? Because we haven't shouted her out yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dan's sister. We're not going to say her name because we're not doing that yet.
Yeah, we're not doing. But she donated $5 for each of her 5 children.
Well, plus her and
her boyfriend.
Yeah.
Then she wants me to read all their names individually.
Well, the thing is, what I didn't realize is she'd asked that like a long time ago, and I forgot that she'd done. And then she went and did it, and I'm like looking at my email, and I'm like seeing these $5 donations come in. I'm like, wait a minute, and so yeah, she's just trolling you basically.
I think she has good intentions.
You think?
Probably not. If history is any teacher.
Right then.
I kid.
So, let's get into this discussion. I'll quickly also mention that follow us on Twitter at Tower Babelcast if you're not doing so already, and head over to Facebook.com/Tower Babelcast as well. We do a lot of fun stuff there on the Facebook page, so head over there as well. So, spin-off series.
Yeah, let's talk.
Yeah, let's.
So there's 4.
Mm-hmm.
Only one is going to be go to series, right?
That's correct.
But 4 options, and who knows? Like maybe somewhere down the line,
well,
might pop up.
We actually don't know. So you don't know the exact details. You said there's 4, orders for scripts have been put together. They will then, once the scripts come in, they'll make decisions on which to pick up. That doesn't necessarily mean that only one of the 4 is getting picked up. I don't think. It's possible. It's likely that they'll start with one, but it's also possible that they'll do others as well. So what I'll say is what we know as far as details so far is that there really is no hard deadline for the writers. They've been given the task to write approved scripts, then come deliver them to HBO when they're ready, essentially, because they want to give them time. They obviously know that this is...
Which, I mean, is the right approach for the creative process.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't want them on having deadlines.
And the thing is, they understand that this is like, that's their cash cow. Game of Thrones is huge for them, and they don't want to rush anything. I think they understand that, or they seem to anyway.
At the same time, I have a bone, like not a bone to pick necessarily, but because George Martin is signed on for 2 of these 4.
Right. I mean, so here,
that he's working on.
So let me
like,
wait, Dan.
Can you write
wait,
books,
Dan.
please?
Wait. Okay. So let me just read the writing or the name of the writers who are on for each one. So we have Max Berenstein, who's the writer from Godzilla and Kong Skull Island. Jane Goldman from Kingsman: The Secret Service, with George R. R. Martin. Brian Helgeland, L.A. Confidential and Robin Hood. And Carly Rae, not to be confused with Carly Rae Jepsen, okay, who is a writer for Mad Men and The Leftovers, both very good shows. Also with George R. R. Martin. So what I would say is, Dan, that first of all, he only wants to work with girls. It's very clear. And that he's probably more involved in those ones, specifically
he's more of
a consultant or advisor or whatever, right? Because you have one writer each and then George R. R. Martin on 2 of them. You don't imagine he's just equally as involved as Carly is or Jane is, specifically because each other one only has one writer anyway. So what do these 2 projects need to have him on?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know the inner workings of this, but I would assume he would be a consultant on any series that they decide.
Well, yeah. So it's George R. R. Martin, David Benioff, and D.B. Weiss are all serve as EPs on the projects, executive producers, and you'll notice that David Benioff and D.B. Weiss aren't writing any. They've already come out. We spoke about this. They are. First of all, they're not only are they fully in with the full Game of Thrones season, which is only in its 7th season. There's still 2 more after that. So they got their work there to do, right? Plus, they've already said that they're kind of, once they're done with Game of Thrones, from the full series, from a writing perspective and a showrunner perspective, they're kind of going to bow out, but stay on
they're probably pretty burnt out. It's understandable.
Yeah. But again, here's the thing. I'm not going to, I'm not going to start crying for these guys. They're doing quite well, and they're doing what they want. They're living the dream as far as working in that business and being able to create these awesome shows that are well loved. So, I mean, at the same time, they will still be involved, right? Other than that, we have no other details about which time periods or which characters they'll be focused on.
But I think I did read that article. I think it mentioned that they were all prequels.
Yeah, I don't know if that. I also read that, and I don't know if that was speculation or if that was a part of the actual thing. It's probably prequels. Because the thing is, we don't know how it ends, so we don't know. We don't know if there even could be a sequel. And that would be a whole other huge tech. Can you imagine a sequel?
What if that comet from season 2 just lands? And blows everything
right. It's everyone dies. It's the worst ending to any. It's worse than the ending to Lost.
Yeah.
Instead of everyone already being dead, they just kill everyone else at the end of the meteor. Yeah. So I said what, and they also released 15 new photos from the season, the upcoming season. I'm not really going to get into to dissecting each individual photo. I guess there's a lot of them have 2 characters in them, and have them looking off screen in some kind of longing or contemplative fashion. So
are they characters that aren't normally?
No, they're all people. I mean, you have stuff like Sansa and Littlefinger, and I mean, not all of them are 2 people. Like there's a picture of Arya, stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So Dan, the reason we convened this emergency meeting is because I wanted to ask you about what you thought would be the right way to go about this. Not, we have the writers and we kind of have a loose feel for what they've done, all very different as far as tone, right? Especially from one to another. Godzilla, Kingsman, LA Confidential, and Mad Men couldn't be more different from each other. So tonally, it's hard to say, which project would one work on better than another. I don't know quite enough about all these people yet to be able to say that.
I couldn't comment on that.
But from purely fan perspective, where would you like them to see go with these 4. So give me 4 or more.
Okay. All right. Well, I have a couple answers. I think in terms of what's worked for the show in the past, a great place to go would be the Dance of the Dragons. So this is after the death of Viserys the First. It's way back, far enough removed that it doesn't necessarily affect the events of the series that we have already, right? Which is why I'm not really interested in seeing Robert's Rebellion. I don't need to see young Ned, young Robert, young Cat. It would be cool to see Rhaegar, I guess, but
they have talked about that being a potential.
I'm sure it is. Like I think there's definitely room for storytelling there. There's an interesting story there, but it takes away, like I said in the last one, it takes away the mystique.
Do you bring back the original actors?
The past.
Do you bring back Sean Bean?
I doubt it.
Yeah, okay.
They're much younger.
Yeah. Okay.
But no, the Dance of the Dragons is a really cool sort of Targaryen civil war that takes place after the death of the king, because he had decided that he wanted his daughter, I think her name is Rhaenyra, to become queen, and she would have been the first female queen, or first female leader, whatever. And before that, it had always gone to the male. So then he has a son, Aegon II, and they have a bunch of infighting. It's a really interesting story. It has all the political intrigue that you would want out of Game of Thrones, which has been successful. The only problem with that is there's a bunch of dragons, and that's been
for them
is the CG.
Is it a hurdle, or are they just something they just choose?
No, like the dragons would have to take the form. Like that would be a big part of this show.
Okay.
There's a whole bunch of duels on Dragonback. Now they can write around that, I'm sure, but the dragons are a huge part of the Dance of the Dragons. Go figure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, I would be very interested in seeing that, and I'm like, we don't have a ton of information about it either, so it's not like the story is cut and dry. There's plenty of room to flesh it out.
Okay.
So that's interesting to me. Another one that I would like, obviously the Dunk and Egg novellas.
Yeah.
Whatever that there's subject matter already there, but what you get from that is the Blackfyre rebellions, which is another very interesting time in the Seven Kingdoms.
Which is what exactly?
So Aegon the Unworthy, this is Aegon the Fourth, I believe, he's called the Unworthy. He was like a really shitty king, and he had a bunch of bastards. So he essentially like he took advantage of people every left, right, and center, and he has a bunch of bastards. He's sort of like the Henry VIII of their world.
Yeah.
So he had wives who couldn't give him a son, so he had them killed, blah, blah, blah. But his legacy is he legitimized one of his bastards. He wanted to legitimize his bastard. And that created another sort of civil war within the Targaryen dynasty. Yeah. So there's those on the Blackfyre side and those on the other side, blah, blah, blah. And that leads directly into, like, this takes place about, 100, 150 years before the events of Game of Thrones. But it does sort of nicely lead into it, and that's the formation of the Golden Company. That area has been explored well, and it is being explored in the Dunk and Egg novellas as well.
Okay.
So I think that has a very high probability of being adapted.
All right. And so, what do we have here? Recap me. What do you?
That's three. That's three. Robert's Rebellion, Dance of the Dragons, Blackfyre Rebellions.
Okay. And
another cool one. I should look in our Slack group. There's someone in our Slack group had mentioned they would like to see more of the Faceless Men, sort of that origin story, which I thought was a great idea because that originates in Valyria. So a cool bit of history would be the fall of Valyria.
That would be cool. I'm on board with that because that is as far removed from any events of anything going on in Game of Thrones or Westeros.
Again, might require a lot of CG, but I'm sure they have the budget. They can write around it.
They have the budget. It's the biggest show on television, Daniel.
I'm just saying, like, Valyria, again, tons of dragons, tons of magic, blah, blah, blah. But the cool thing about it, and I mentioned this in our Slack group, is that would it be sort of like a mix of Spartacus and Game of Thrones? It's a slave revolt. Valyria is essentially the Roman Empire. The Faceless Men originated as slaves in Valyria, broke out, and eventually founded the free city of Braavos,
Right.
So that's a really cool story right there.
Can I just say that if of all the ones you've said so far, that's my favorite one.
Yeah, and that one again, like in terms of what's been successful for Game of Thrones, all that political stuff, you could have. There's all these Valyrian families, not even the Targaryen. The Targaryens were a lesser family in Valyria,
right?
But all the higher ups, there would be a ton of infighting between them, and
that's so perfect because then again, it has the name, it has the dragons, it has the magic stuff, but it also has the political intrigue stuff that you can, that is like, completely separate, and you have there's no stakes, quote unquote, like there are. That's not okay. I take that back. The stakes would be different, right? You don't have you don't have to worry about what the impact of that decision would have on the events of the original series, at least not in any significant major way, right? You might be following Targaryens, and you might know that they'll eventually leave or get out. Was it they get outcast or something like that?
What happens is Daenerys the Dreamer, she's like sees prophecy, so she has a dream and she sees the fall of Valyria. So she convinces her family to fly westward. So they fly on their dragons. They land on Dragonstone,
Right.
And for a while, they are the furthest west point of the Empire. Then the Empire falls.
Right. Okay. So you might follow a Targaryen as your main character, perhaps.
Yeah, you could even you wouldn't follow Aegon, but yeah.
But it gives you some grounding to the original, because then the name would ground you in what's happening, right? But then you'd also have all this other stuff that you have no idea how it played out, or what the impact of those actions would have. So it's basically an entirely new series that has the name and has all the stuff that makes it Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
But without the baggage of the ongoing regular series.
But the only other thing is it's not grounded in Westeros. It's not a huge deal, but
same universe.
It's a completely
same
new
world.
area.
Yeah.
Same world. And it deals with stuff that we know has been successful for TV in the past. Again, the analogy between Valyria and the Roman Empire, that's not an original thought. I'm sure a million people have thought that.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear cut. But then there's the story of the hubris. They thought they were invincible. They were screwing around with magic, whatever. So there's that whole theme of magic, of the natural world sort of taking back, which is part of what we see in Game of Thrones now. So yeah, it's got legs.
It's good. All right. Any others? Do you have any others, or is that your?
I'm sure there's many. They could do stories of like the Age of Heroes, but that's more like mythology style. It's not. Again, not very well explored, so there's room for storytelling. Like, interesting to see Brandon the Builder potentially building Westeros, building the Wall, and there's a lot more magic back then, but it doesn't have the same like guts that these other ones had in my mind. I would love to see the Dance of the Dragons. I think that's a great place to tell a story that doesn't affect everything. Would love to see the Blackfire Rebellions. I don't want to see Robert's Rebellion.
Yes, you made that very clear. I would be okay with it, only because for the opposite reason of what I just talked about, that it is the most closely tied to what we already have, right? So it gives you an opportunity to explore characters that we didn't get a lot of.
Sure.
Right, and so there's that part of it, right? But I largely agree with what you're saying. It's probably best for it to stay as far away as possible, at least for now. Give the original series some time to breathe, especially once it comes to an end in a couple of years, and then maybe come back and explore those characters again. Instead of trying to get right back into that same, era. Right? There's so much time. There's such a wide swath of time to explore. Right? You don't need to right away, revisit these same characters. We don't need to see Cersei as a child, right? Like, not right away anyway.
Exactly. Like, you don't want to see Robert's Rebellion and then have that lead into the Iron Islands Rebellion, and then you see, there's this young Theon that Ned takes. That's kind of the trap that Star Wars has fallen into a couple times.
Anything else there?
I mean, I don't know. They can tell a completely different story in Aside by the Shadow, but I doubt they would go that route. The land where Melisandre and the Red God come from is called Aside by the
It's like if you go west further?
East. Or potentially west. Like, I've often thought that it's a globe, but it's never been presented as such.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. It'd be weird if it wasn't. I don't...
Well, I mean, plenty of fantasy worlds don't,
They don't, yeah.
They never really specify.
They don't say whether or not.
In the Tolkien universe, you can't sail to the Undying Lands without the permission of the Valar, so it's not really a globe there.
Okay,
Yeah, Ashai is like the furthest east.
So you go past Valyria or further west. That's the impression I get. If you go...
Potentially, I truly believe... Also, in the books, one of the things that... I don't know if you remember Quaithe, the lady in the red mask that spoke to Daenerys a few times.
Nope. I really don't.
Whatever. She's pretty enigmatic. She essentially has a prophecy like, to go forward, you must go back. To go east, you must go west, sort of thing. To reach the light, you must pass under the shadow. And like in my mind, that's you must go all the way west.
Yeah.
To reach the shadow, which is a shy by the shadow.
Yeah. Okay, that's smart.
But it's getting late in the series. I don't know if there'll be time for that.
Well, Daniel, who knows, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that's going to die in this coming season, I presume. So they'll have lots of time to spend with other characters.
Maybe that could be it.
But I mean, I don't want to spend too much time speculating on what's going to happen this season, just because we did a little bit of that recently.
So out of like, if you forget what I said, if you like, what answers do you want? Like, what season would you want? One of these
If it was up to me, if I was at HBO and I was making these decisions, and that was the final say, I would see. I'm an analytics guy, right? So I would kind of look at it and be like, what is it about Game of Thrones that makes it what it is, right? What are those key ingredients? And then what era? Then I would go to George R. R. Martin and be like, okay, what era in time that you've created in this mythology allows for that to flourish at its best, right? So I'd say your best bet is then to determine what makes Game of Thrones what it is. Is it political intrigue? Yes, obviously that has to be true. What else? Is it unexpected results, or anyone can die at any time? No one is safe.
Anyone's vulnerable.
Okay, that's another thing. Is it magic and dragons and stuff like that? Is that a key ingredient? Because that didn't come in until later, right?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a key ingredient. Yeah,
but is maybe part of what makes it so popular, even if it's not what drives the show forward.
It's probably a selling feature for sure.
So so you could say if that one's a third, not as important. If it's more about
I would say largely though it's mostly about the characters.
Right. Is it
being able to create these complex characters out of almost nothing, right?
Well, yeah, isn't that the art of? And
it's like a slow burn, You get to know them as you go, and they're interesting the entire time, even when you don't know them very well.
So, what era then open? What does that allow for? Like we talked about, like I said, like that old Valyria. I think absolutely, opens the door for that for that mix of ingredients to create another really good show, right? Because you don't want to just stick the name of Game of Thrones on it and it's like a noir detective show. It's like that doesn't work, right? It has to be true to the series, right? So I think I'm gonna double down on that and say that
the doom of the
is, and it also creates sense of urgency, right? Because you know that it comes to an end, right? That there's it's leading somewhere, where it's leading, and someone can say, well, that takes away, it could possibly take away from it because it. But I think it creates suspense through this overlying suspense over the entire series, right?
Yeah, and as much as that it reaches
you
have no idea how or what. There's still a mystery.
Because you could lay out a red herring and say it's going to be volcanic eruptions, right? But
which is what most people assume.
But it's not, right? It's something else entirely, right? Who knows? It's another.
I've always kind of looked at it as them screwing around with magic, and it's essentially like they're imagine nuclear physicists trying to create an atomic bomb and then accidentally setting it off. That's kind of what I look at it as.
Oh, I mean, it could be another form of we have the White Walkers, these ice creatures, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's some sort of version of that wiped out these people.
Yeah, because they're heavily involved with magic, so they might awaken something they shouldn't have.
So I mean,
and that could easily tie in with R'hllor and the Red God.
Mm-hmm. Right? So with fire instead of So I think that that's my best bet. I hope that. I don't know if that's what they're exploring. I'm just going to look over the writers. Who would be best to explore something like that?
Yeah. Who knows?
The Carly Ray, who's done Mad Men and Leftovers, is the right fit there, and she's working with Martin. So if anyone was going to do it, I would want her to get not super well acquainted with her work, but just knowing what Mad Men and Leftovers are, I think that kind of fits the bill, at least from a pure writing perspective. From a visual,
Mad Men definitely does a lot of character work, a lot of intermingling.
When Leftovers deals with kind of larger than yourself ideas, right? That could be implemented, I think, in a show like Game of Thrones. And again, working with George R. R. Martin for something that hasn't been explored and fleshed out yet, that's where he's going to come into play, right? So I think...
You know what, now that while you were saying that, I was thinking about something completely different, but the whole idea of Robert's Rebellion might not be that bad, because I would really like to see Rhaegar portrayed well as the tragic figure, you know? Like, he's, you know, the prince who should have been, everyone should love him, but he's this sad sort of, like, distant figure, and you know that he has a tragic end. Yeah. And it's almost like the events of Game of Thrones shouldn't have happened. Like, in a regular story, Rhaegar should have won that fight. You know what I mean? So it would be kind of cool to see him as a sort of tragic figure. I mean,
that's the thing, Dan. I know your knee-jerk reaction was to say no to that, but I think that I think it really could work, because
they could make it work
purely from the characterization side of it, right?
Well, because it's starting with things that we already have a familiarity with, right? It's not something brand.
What if it's just a single one season, kind of like the Spartacus prequel was?
See, I think here's why I was thinking about this yesterday, actually, because we were going to have this show. I think the reason, or one of the reasons that Spartacus sequel worked so well is because it wasn't planned. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't talk at all about that time in season 1 of Spartacus. You never hear them talk about Badiatus' father,
no,
or Gannicus, you know, or any of that kind of stuff. So they weren't pigeonholed. Whereas now we know where the story ends. We have these characters that are referenced. There's less wiggle room.
Yeah, I mean, less wiggle room, but you could do a lot.
There's still plenty, but,
right? Especially with the character that they've never mentioned, right?
It's just, if you were to then take it as an entire series, watch them back to back to back, which I mean, not many will, but some of us who are really nerdy might. If you do Robert's Rebellion and you have all that stuff with Lyanna and Rhaegar, doesn't that take away from the Jon reveal? You know, like, that kind of ruin
but couldn't you
that whole, like, his 6 season arc of not knowing?
Is that not the case for the prequels to Star Wars too?
No, because we already knew. You're right. Actually, we knew Anakin was going to become Darth Vader the whole time, and we were looking forward to that.
Right, but it also ruins the reveal of Luke, or of Vader being Luke's father. Spoilers.
I think we're past that point.
There's that hilarious Simpsons. You know that Simpsons where he's like walking out of the theater. He's like, I can't believe. Well,
I mean, and it's interesting. Like, this is something I feel like we talk about a lot, but it is interesting to have that conversation. And I've tried it a couple different ways when introducing people to Star Wars. And I'm of the mind that you should watch 4, 5 first. I go 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6. With my ex-girlfriend, that's what we did. Just because you do want the power in that reveal, and then you go back and tell Anakin's story, right?
So the way I always looked at it with stuff like this is, right, something's a prequel, right? So it means it relies on the thing that comes after it. It wasn't its own thing, and then there was something else. This is it. So you watch the original piece followed by the prequels, because the job of the prequel is to flush out aspects from the thing you've already seen.
That makes
right?
sense.
It's not meant to be just because it comes chronologically before doesn't mean that's intended from a storytelling perspective intended to be seen in that order, right?
Yeah, and you adjust your viewing order. There are plenty of people that would look at it the opposite way,
and you know, and that's fine if that's how they see it. It would. You think it's like, does it ruin the reveal, or does it create a different type of by knowing that something's coming, right? Does that not? It doesn't ruin it. It just creates a different experience.
No, it's a different.
It doesn't mean it's worse.
Maybe not. And again, the period of time of Robert's Rebellion is a very interesting time. There's so much going on, and it would be great. You have that sort of confliction when you know you want to believe in Robert and Ned. These, like Ned especially, like honorable man. You think he's doing the right thing, and John Aaron and all these people. But at the same time, if they do it right, you're gonna want Rhaegar to win, even though his dad is an ass. Like his dad's the Mad King, and he's a horrible person. It's gonna be so conflicted. You're gonna meet Brandon, Ned's older brother. You'd see Rickard Stark. Like I can see all the benefits of that time. Absolutely. Yeah, young Benjen.
I love seeing the name Benjen.
And you'd see, it would be a similar story. You would see that Stark family all together, just like we started this series with the Stark family all together, then they spread out. That Stark family would start all together, happy, and then shit goes down.
So what you're saying is you've managed to convince yourself of the opposite.
Maybe I have, no, I 100%, I see the merit to it. There are other places we could tell stories. And honestly, I love this series this much. We all know it. I hope all 4 get picked up eventually. I would love to see all 4 of those different stories.
Not even knowing what they are, right? What the ones that are actually
like the ones that I mentioned, or even other ones.
So we make a lot of comparisons to Star Wars just because of the epic scope, right? And a vast mythology to explore, right? So some people, oftentimes in Star Wars, and I'm a big Star Wars fan, say, I don't want to see the Han Solo film, because there's so much other cool stories to see.
Yeah, I think I'm one of them.
Right? And actually. So, and that falls in that same, I don't need to see Robert's Rebellion because there's so many other stories to explore and things we've never even seen and things we've never even heard of. And it just creates, which can flesh out the world in a completely different kind of way, right? And then there's that people who are like, yeah, but I like these things. I like how these things are. I like these characters and I want more from them. So there's just 2 very different ways of looking at it that I don't think are inherently one's better than the other, right? Because as a Star Wars fan, yeah, I want to see a cool bounty hunter movie. But if there's gonna be a cool bounty hunter movie, I wouldn't mind if Boba Fett was in it. Like that, like you know what I mean? Because he's freaking cool. So always think like, oh, let's see more new characters. Absolutely. Right.
More new and
but as a comic book fan as well, the interweaving of storylines in both Star Wars or Game of Thrones is interesting, and I like that is even without actually knowing what the story is, knowing that they interweave in some way is interesting in and of itself. So
no, it makes sense. I think again, it's tough with Robert's Rebellion. We might be retreading ground here, but you have the problem of the outcome, so the stakes are automatically lower, no matter what.
Well, but we said the same thing about the Old Valyria, but it's slightly different.
Slightly different. Like what I'm saying is, like you and I have talked about Rogue One a lot. Again, we keep going back to Star Wars. You know how that story ends, and you don't necessarily care about those characters. Now with this, you might care about the characters a little bit more, and it's cool to see their story. It takes a little bit away, and if it's not on the same scale as Game of Thrones, I don't know that it will be as.
So the thing is, I agree only because there's, when you say less wiggle room earlier, and I've been thinking about it. It's like, well, the Star Wars prequels, you knew, what did you know about? You knew that Anakin was to become Vader, right?
Mm-hmm. And you knew that there was an event called the Clone Wars.
Right. That's it, right? So there's so much stuff to fill in.
And you knew the Republic would fall, but like they had more quote unquote wiggle room because those things weren't really explored.
Yeah, they're not explained. So many details about Robert's Rebellion, right? Like down to who won which battles and when, right? The point where it makes it tougher because it's one thing to say like, okay, these are where the pieces end up, but how they get there, right? We know how they got there and where they end up, so that makes it a little bit tougher. You would need to almost explore it from someone else's perspective. And not be seeing it through Ned's eyes or Robert's eyes.
Which, we're going to talk about something new now, which is why I think the Tales of Dunk and Egg is kind of the happy medium. It takes place in far enough past initially that there's pretty much only one character you'll recognize, right? But as it progresses, there'll be more and more references to events that we'll be familiar with. And again, when I was thinking about this last night, this might pique your interest, Julian. Sir Dunk from Dunk and Egg is basically like the Forrest Gump of that universe.
What?
Yeah, he's like a.
He does a lot of running.
No, he's just like a guy that he's a big dumb guy essentially.
Oh, okay.
That's how he sees himself, and he ends up.
All these
huge events.
Okay, I get it.
He just happens to be there.
Okay.
He just falls into it. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. I think that has room as well.
I think we can wrap it up there. And that was a good little emergency session of the Small Council. I know there's a lot of different podcasts out there that call themselves the Small Council of whatever, or I went with, again, and I mentioned this. I mentioned this on the last podcast that we just recorded, that a lot of the names of our segments we have on the show and titles for things,
a little on the nose,
a little uninspired. But you know what? I'm just saying, I just like to be straightforward with you. We're talking about Game of Thrones. We're a Tower Babble podcast, and we're breaking it down. It's all in the title,
You get what you pay for. You know exactly what.
Exactly. No, Game of Thrones comes first in the order of the titles, but you have to know that it's about Game of Thrones. So there you go. All right. But other than that, I think it's been a good discussion.
Yeah,
and we'll be back maybe with another one before the season. Who knows? We didn't plan this one. We didn't expect this story to drop. So if there's another big story that comes out before season 7, we'll probably be back for you. Reminder again, the GoFundMe, gofundme.com/GOT season 7. That's the number 7. And help us out there. If not, head over to iTunes, drop us a review. We always appreciate those. Follow us on Twitter @TowerBabblecast and Facebook, facebook.com/TowerBabblecast. And find everything we do, including the other podcasts I just mentioned, over at our website, towerbabble.ca. And we'll be back eventually.
Yeah, take it easy.